So I'm not quite sure where to start. I think maybe let's just address some of the comments issue. And actually, I'm just going to call this, we're going to call this e-commerce protocol. Okay. And then, so we'll go through some of the comments and some of the things that have been added here and there. And then we'll dive into like, this is sort of now our current architectural model. There's a little bit more on sort of how the decision making of how the tokenomics emit, and we understand a little bit better where the protocol actors sit and what they look like, how they enter, and yeah, we've been talking a lot about like incentives and everything. So you could, I'll spotlight me, and then we'll just go around in order. And so like I'll just start with comments. Here.
I don't see your screen. I'm not sure if you mean to share your screen, but I don't see it. Or do you want to?
No. So okay. I would say just go into the Figma, and then like when you're in the Figma, you can snap to my screen, and you can follow me around as I go around. And so this is I think one of the first comments, and this was just like a general conversation about how we're going to censor products. And so I think that has been, we've sort of rethought about that, and maybe we'll get into this a little bit later. But right now, so we've been having an ongoing conversation with a developer who's building out a very, very primitive like e-commerce protocol. And the way he describes it is that it's TCP/IP. So it just allows e-commerce transactions to happen. And it creates vendors and database relays. So a relay can be registered in their general protocol, which will allow like product data to be stored in sort of a decentralized relay network. Marketplaces would operate their own versions of these relays within our sort of like marketplace down a little bit ways. And then vendors are also sort of like primary. There's two actors in this protocol. There is a vendor and then there's a relay. And a vendor would then have to sign in and create their like social e-commerce profile with us, right? And this is the protocol that we've been calling LoadPipe. And then they would again exist at this sort of higher level protocol level, and then also just check into marketplaces. So yeah, I mean like that's how we've decided we're gonna do the filtering. Or I mean like that's I think maybe how makes most sense to do the filtering of products is literally just by filtering vendors. So vendors like onboard into the protocol, vendors onboard into the marketplaces, and they're subject to the rules and justice processes of both the protocol at a very high level, which again, I think maybe we would just say no kids, no kidneys. And then the marketplaces have their own sort of like maybe stricter interpretations of what sort of products a vendor can have, and then they have a justice process to boot a vendor in the case where they're hosting products. And so yeah, I mean, like, sorry, go ahead.
Excuse me, sorry for interrupting, but why is the buyer not an actor in this protocol?
The buyer is. So this is, I would say, and actually, I think you're probably right, and this is like something is a thought process that I've gone through with vendors, but I've yet to like fully comprehend buyers. I think because to me, buyers are separated in two categories, what we call like guest buyers and logged in buyers. And so like a guest buyer should be able to come and initiate a transaction without having any sort of like social profile, right? But if you want to have like, if you want to leave a review, if you want to log in, you should have to create an NFT. And you're absolutely right. I think that probably does live at the protocol level. So you're right. I think I haven't made the change to reflect that yet. But you're right. Buyers do exist at the protocol level, I think. Unless anybody... Sorry, go ahead.
In the moment that buyers log in through their wallet address, I think they're already logged in. I mean, they don't have a store or anything, but they exist as actors, and they have a reputation too.
I suppose you're right, but that reputation only exists as at the marketplace level. So like a marketplace will maintain a database. If they make a purchase, then it'll be using their wallet, but it won't have like they have to mint and own an NFT to have this like sort of social profile. So like, and that's sort of what I mean is like you can log into a website and go through the authorization process using a wallet. But then that's like the authorization of the front end that's stored in the front end's database. It's not a record of like the buyer at the protocol level, because in order to enable like those like sort of social tracking metrics, they would have to like be part of a buyer registry that we're indexing at the protocol level. And in order to do that, they would have to perform a separate on-chain action. And I think that like when we dive into some of the tokenomics stuff we've been thinking of, I think that like a guest buyer, someone who just buys with their cryptocurrency wallet, is not someone who can receive protocol emissions or like social protocol emissions. They probably can't even receive, although I doubt there will be any e-commerce protocol emissions. But so like the incentive is to create this profile.
Maybe they could, because it's not the same thing having a buyer that has like 1 or 2 transactions versus a buyer that has like thousands of transactions. That's a power buyer, and maybe they could have access to greater discount levels. They could be more trustworthy, etc. And they could engage in practices that are better for the e-commerce system.
I think what Bo is saying is they have to opt into. They could still be a power buyer, but they wouldn't opt into the ecosystem if they didn't want to. They should, and they probably would benefit from it, but they don't have to. Right, Bo?
I think. Well, this is an interesting question, because, like, in reality, right? Like, if they didn't want to like log into the social aspects, they didn't want to receive the benefits, and they didn't want they could just use the base e-commerce protocol, and then whoever's selling on that. But like. Yeah, maybe if they want access to these more social aspects, like we force a login of some kind.
Well, they also want the protection. They might want the protection or the justice, but not want some are more anonymous or private, or it might be different reasons. I don't know. Or does this give up privacy is a good question too, right?
I think this is an interesting question, and it's something that we need to put a little bit more thought into. But like buyer login versus like, because it's also making me think like, okay, well, how does a guest do disputes, right? Like, because a guest, even if you're a guest buyer, you should be able to do a dispute. And so like maybe the solution there is as Jose is saying, like we just have to force everyone to like sort of create this like social profile, or it's like we have to design it in a way such that like someone can raise a dispute even if they don't have the social profile, or like as part of the dispute process, like you just have to create this profile. Like if you want to leave a review, if you want to have a dispute, you sort of have to have a social profile. And so maybe it's like we allow guest buyers and then we incentivize the creation of the profile, but it's not necessary unless you want to engage in any of the core actions that like of the ecosystem, right? Like if you want to leave a review, if you want to raise a dispute, then you have to have a profile, and you have to create that through your wallet. I think that makes sense. So like you can do a buy, and if everything goes fine, then sure. But and also like vendors will, and we'll get to this a little bit farther down. I think there's maybe a good time to like pivot to here into one of these other discussions. I think this one here is about
that's your judgment, your appeal cost function. I added some observations on the notes.
This is the appeal cost function. This one is about the like random selection of judges. And so this one is one, there's like Mike's comment, which did shoppers get less than 100% refunded if they won a dispute? And we recently had a conversation with Andrew Lee where he mentioned that buyers expect 100, like we'll settle for nothing less basically than 100% refund. That's sort of what they expect.
Jose, do you want to share?
And then my comment here, I think the reputation should factor into the initial AC calculation. So like that's again something that we haven't really thought of. But again, that it implies that a buyer has a reputation, which means they have a social profile. So but that's a way of like filtering out like sort of the refund abuse, right? If someone like, because again, we have to trust that the system works most of the time, or at least that it is pretty consistently trustworthy. and that like disputes, even though they're subjective, will resolve in the truth more often than not. Like it's an assumption that we have to make, but like we're just going to have to make that assumption. And if that's true, then someone who's like spamming disputes should be ruled against at a pretty high rate, and that would impact their reputation and thus impact the cost of making an initial dispute at all, right? If they have like a negative dispute, that somehow is like a constant modifier on the cost of appeal.
Which is one of the reasons you should have buyers in the protocol, because that reputation carries over into the marketplace and possibly other marketplaces. Like this guy is prone to make a refund abuse, and so he has a higher appeal cost if that is factored into the function.
And that's what I'm saying. I think maybe, and let me know if you disagree, but I think maybe what I said a little bit earlier is maybe the best solution I can come up with, at least, which is that like guests can buy, guests just can't take actions. So like a guest buyer could buy something, and then and hopefully everything just goes according to plan, and they don't get any rewards and they don't get any discounts, and we're not tracking anything like that. But if they want to leave a review and if they want to raise a dispute, all of a sudden now they have to create a profile. And I don't think this like solves for like civil abuse. So like if someone comes in, makes a purchase, raises a dispute, and then makes a new profile, makes a purchase, raises a dispute, like how do we distinguish, how do we have like civil resistance to someone just spinning up new profiles every time?
We've had various.
I don't know really what the answer is to that.
Well, in that case, you'd be pitting a vendor with quite a large and good reputation versus a buyer with no reputation. So that kind of should indicate that you're having that you should consider the vendor more than the buyer.
It makes me think.
It makes you think. Yeah, I mean, I think that maybe we need to work a little bit more on this formula and figure out like what, because there'll be a bunch of different factors that go into determining like initial appeal costs. And I think that should be one of them. So as long as we're talking about it, so you added this like +1 here.
Yeah.
And I don't quite understand, because that's why I have this +1 in the initial formula, right? So like if we imagine that in the first dispute there's an against ruling, so F is 0, but it's F +1, so that you end up with 1/1, and so now the cost of a dispute is increased to just whatever the dispute amount is, right? And we can, but that's why I added that 1 there, right? Is so that you never have a denominator of 0.
Oh, I see. Well, then you forgot the parentheses.
Jose's a mathematician.
You're right.
Jose's a mathematician here.
Yeah. You're right. Whoops. Okay.
I
see what you're saying.
If I could just say about
order of operations. Okay, go ahead.
David, go ahead.
Should we consider preventive suspension of accounts in case a vendor receives more than one dispute in 1 week, for example? Imagine they don't have stock, but they keep selling as they have, right? And they want just to gather some money and then close the account. But not deliver.
So I think that's
in prevention.
Yeah. I think that is solved by so there's 2 design patterns that solve that. One is the staking of vendors. So like we'll jump into this like process a little bit here, but like a vendor technically is registered outside of our e-commerce protocol, and each of these marketplaces theoretically will have an interface to be able to like, if someone wants to register as a vendor in one of these marketplaces, what'll happen is they'll be running their own like relay node. They will register with the super protocol, this vendor, and then they'll like immediately issue them the like social NFT. And so now they have like sort of these 2 profiles, right? But like it's all been created within one marketplace. And so like their data technically exists like out here, outside of the protocol, but also then there's like a check-in here where they exist in the vendor registry. And the vendor registry here is going to require some stake. So like if you want to be upgraded to a vendor, then you have to stake some token And that token, again, we don't have like we don't have a formula for it yet, but like that should have some relationship with the amount of total escrow you can hold at any given time. And so vendors like get emissions, and as a result of like good behavior, their total escrow amount will increase over time if they're good actors. But it's like sort of a natural limit on how much escrow they can hold. And then when they're in escrow, like, and multiple disputes have been raised, yeah, I mean, I think that there should be some like sanity check number of like, if you're being ruled, if you have 10 disputes taken out against you and you're ruled against in all cases, like, then you should be just like suspended as a vendor at the protocol level. But I think that will come naturally sort of as a result of like the vendor reputation. So there's like a natural limit on how much escrow they can have based on the amount that they've staked. Those stakes can also be slashed in the result of like we can also write conditions where like if you have like a 70%, if you fall below a certain threshold of like disputes resolved against you, we can slash their stake and just like take half of the money that they have staked in the vendor registry or in their like vendor stake. And so like, yeah, there's a couple of like punishing mechanisms that we can implement that have like real sort of monetary impact to vendors. And those can be like exercised in pretty extreme cases. I would say, like, I forget who we were having this conversation with, but someone saying that, I think it was James who was saying like, obviously people respond better to positive incentives to negative than negative incentives. And so it should be some like, again, we're not quite sure what the parameter is yet, but that's the mechanism I think that would resolve that.
Okay, because at the end, the same we are willing to punish bad behavior, we can recompensate, we can, it's kind of a multiplier for good behavior, right? Mm-hmm. If you keep a good, a good point marker for a long time and you don't have disputes and all your customers are happy, you keep a multiplier in governance, while when you have a dispute, you go back to zero. It's kind of a video game, right? If you do things right, you get the multiplier. When you fail, the multiplier goes away, right? So that incentivizes people to have good behavior.
Yeah, I mean, and we can also use, like, because again, so we'll have like a formula that dictates amount total escrow possible, right? So like your volume as a vendor is dictated by some combination of your stake and your reputation. And so like the reputation can be a constant or exponential multiplier, some exponential multiplier of your allowed, like basically it can change the collateralization ratio of your total allowable escrow, right? So if you have $100 stake and initially we say, okay, you have zero reputation, so that means that you can have like $50 in total escrow, right? And so you make a couple of sales and 5 stars, and now like, okay, you have a 5-star review weighted by this many number of sales. Now your $100 stake means that you can have $500 worth of total escrow, right?
Well, in that case, maybe you should consider a logarithmic function and not an exponential one. Why? Because for the first few transactions, you gain reputation quickly and you gain access to bigger stakes quickly. But then after you have like thousands of transactions, any additional positive transactions is not going to make a real difference. So that's logarithmic.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I agree. And on it, and yeah, any help in designing these multipliers and functions would be much appreciated. And yeah, especially like catching order of operations errors when they occur. My apologies for that. So I think that's all the comments. I think I'll dive in unless we have any more.
I just want to
any other comments or like from the Discord.
Can you hear me or I'm not sure.
But in case something goes wrong, you tend to. You use your insurance, so to speak.
What do you mean?
So being a buyer and logging in before every transaction is I would consider that as a sort of an insurance policy for using the open, trustless quote trustless marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
Where Amazon, and in those cases, being able to use the dispute mechanism to get some money back, I would consider that to be some sort of an insurance, and it has a cost. Hence the fees.
Yeah. Well, I think that the fees make a lot of sense given that both of these things are a service, right? Yeah. Dispute resolution is an insurance policy, and it's a service, right?
Right, and the fees would be to incentivize the judges, because the judges doing duty on a dispute, that's considered a service.
Yeah, I think that's a job, right? So when I think about actors, I think about them as people with jobs, right? These are all jobs within the ecosystem. Buyer is maybe the only thing we could say is not a job, but even they have things like tasks to do that contribute to the overall health of the ecosystem. And I would even say that is maybe one of the things to that is different about Web3 is that for instance, when buyers leave reviews, that's data that is valuable to Amazon. And so in a sense, even though they're the ones who are consuming the service, they also play a part and have a small job, and that job should be rewarded, right? And so that's sort of how I think about all these actors. All these actors have jobs to do. And I guess here also is probably devs. But devs is a little bit harder because they're doing off-chain stuff. Although I think that they should be paid out of the marketplace treasury. But I think this encapsulates all the jobs. But yeah, this one's a little bit harder because it's hard to define.
Well, you put devs there. Why not put on a protocol as well? Because we would want development on the. If you mean grant, I was thinking about grants for developers for building tools in the protocol.
Yeah, and again, it's so when we're talking about this e-commerce protocol, right? All it's doing is collecting some small fee in order to maintain, and then the protocol DAO will just pay devs, right? And those are sort of social commitments, right? Rather than on-chain enforceable actions, because the maintenance of a front end and uptime and everything like that, the protocol. I guess there's sort of. I think that gets a little bit too complex, but so the protocol DAO and this protocol DAO might create work streams for development bounties in a similar way that the marketplace DAO might create bounties for its developers and give some budget to those work streams and everything like that. But I guess part of why I'm hesitant to include them is these actors are the ones that we can, when we're thinking about tokenomics, we can really think about incentives for. Whereas the dev incentive is just to continue the site functioning, and a lot of that is just Web 2 stuff. I guess the protocol is a little bit different.
The tokenomics thing hinges upon transactions. Transactions in the marketplace being the atomic element that drives everything. So I don't see how devs could somehow earn incentives based on each transactions. To me, they should that should be outside of the scope of the token.
Agreed.
And manage it through a foundation or some other mechanism. I think, I don't know.
No, I agree. And that's sort of what I mean is these are the actors who get token emissions within the protocol. The devs have to be paid outside of through the DAO, through the individual DAO treasuries. And the DAOs will make money if transactions are happening, and they'll make it not in protocol token, right? They'll make it in a percentage of the hard currencies that are being transacted with. So I guess let's not think about them for now. Okay. Any more thoughts or questions here?
Why don't you just include the buyers in the marketplace actors? Both.
What'd you say?
Why don't you include the buyers there as actors in the marketplaces?
Because to me, it's like sort of a question of, it's like a question of, this is, maybe I'm confusing myself in thinking about like where the data exists versus where the emissions happen. So maybe.
Okay. It's not a big deal. No, never mind. No.
I think you're right. I think that this is a good question because like when we're talking about, well, I mean, there's like part of the reason I put those two, like vendors and
logged in buyers.
Yeah, vendors, and I'm just going to call them buyers for now, but vendors and buyers in the protocol is because both of these are portable, right? Like that's sort of our whole thing is like both of these exist, and the vendor can go to, vendor and buyers can go to this marketplace, and then they can leave and go to this marketplace, right? They can leave and go to this marketplace. But one of the things that we've been thinking about is how to just determine where emissions come from. So we know that like the protocol DAO is the one that's going to be ultimately controlling like the emissions of the token. And then what we were thinking, and this is where I would like some feedback and thought, is that the protocol DAO has a couple of different kinds of emissions, right? The first is directly to its sort of Supreme Court. So where did my little tokens go?
Okay, so Bo, to use the analogy, if the protocol DAO is sort of like the Federal Reserve, right?
Yeah.
And marketplaces are commercial banks, then I think that the protocol emissions to the buyers and vendors should occur at the marketplace level, and they should be somehow trickled down from the protocol DAO, right?
This is exactly what I'm getting at, right? Is that you're exactly on the money, right? This is how we're thinking about it, is that there is a percentage of tokens in the sort of like base form, right, that flow straight to the Supreme Court, right, to this protocol level judge registry. And hopefully, and again, like just deciding the different like emissions rates and how much and everything like that. Hopefully this judge pool is not being used that much, right? This judge pool is sort of there to determine, and we need to like think and write out like what is the jurisdiction of this judge pool? What does it mean for a dispute to be escalated from the marketplace level to the protocol level? Because like clearly like they can settle disputes of like the protocol DAO thinks that this marketplace is engaged in fraudulent activity, generally fraudulent activity. And so they initiate a justice process, which is then decided by the people in this judge registry, right? But like, if there's an internal marketplace dispute, if like one buyer is like, has a dispute with a vendor, does that ever exit the marketplace judge pool? Unless like, I mean, I can imagine a condition where someone's like, hey, I think that the marketplace is fucking around and protocol judges, you need to take a look at this. And then it instigates sort of a like wider, but that gets really, really complicated. And I haven't fully wrapped my head around how that works yet. But okay, so let's just get back to this idea. Tokens in their base form emitted to the judge registry. Then we also have tokens, and we think that they should be emitted to the marketplaces in their staked form. And by that, I mean, like, when a marketplace is formed, the initial governors of the marketplace will have to stake into like a marketplace DAO contract, which has been determined by the larger DAO. Oh my God.
Yeah.
And then, why can't I move it? All right. Oh, no. There we go. All right. So, and that will create, like, for instance, let's call the protocol token load, let's call the marketplace Hamza. That would create this token, which is a wrapped version of the initial token, which is like Hamza load. And we think that that's how the protocol should emit generally, right? Is it emits based on certain criteria, which this criteria are things that the protocol can set as parameters to weight in its determination of percentage allocation of tokens. So if it's allocating 20% to the judge pool and 80% to the marketplaces, then like vendors get rewarded in tokens through the marketplaces where they're making sales. And so like then you have the marketplace DAO, which is just receiving these token emissions, and it has a governance process to determine the percentages that it allocates to buyers, to its judges, and to its vendors, and then to its governors, right? And then those are sort of the parameters that the marketplace governors can set to either incentivize vendors to onboard in their marketplace, incentivize more judges, but they can, and so these are the sort of like rough metrics that we decided, or at least initially outlined, would be good markers of, and these aren't perfect, but like these are some good initial thoughts of like, what are the things that would weight at different levels to determine what percentage are flowing to which marketplaces. Like average escrow time is, again, not perfect. We talked to Mike a little bit about this, and he raised this idea of like some marketplaces will be shipping from China to South America, and that's like that requires require container ships, right? And so like how can this be a fair metric? And I think that maybe, I don't really know how to determine like what is a fair
I think
metric for that.
I think what we said was,
well, you could consider a class of similar marketplaces and the standing or ranking of that marketplace in that class.
Mm-hmm.
Do I make myself clear on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to. So the one thing to remember is that like what the protocol knows is it knows average escrow time, right? It doesn't know what the expected escrow time is unless we write that on chain somehow. And so this was the idea Mike had, was like maybe it's the differential between expected and actual delivery. So like expected escrow time versus actual escrow time. Another way to do it is like the protocol DAO might be able to like set as a parameter what like a standard, right? So like we know that 1 day delivery is possible, right? Amazon does it. Maybe it's a little bit optimistic given the decentralized nature of our protocol, but like the protocol could set like a number that it expects that is like some good average for all of this, and then in aggregate, like whether or not marketplaces are falling to and away from that is sort of a different issue. So I don't know. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I think average escrow time versus expected escrow time. I think that would be a good index. Yeah, it would be fair. It would be something to make comparisons across all marketplaces fair.
Yeah, because then, I mean, I guess like marketplaces can compete with one another based on their average expected time, and that's like something that they can display to users, right? And I mean, I think that that's maybe the fairest way to look at it. But again, we got to remember what is on-chain information, what is information that the smart contract can't know. So yeah, that's sort of what we have in terms of like general flow right now. I wonder if there's any sort of general comments, thoughts, questions.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. That works. Yeah, I was saying a couple things to call, but about the escrow time, I think we're maybe chatting with James. It's what's the declared time, and then if it's longer than expected by the agreement, that would be a negative. I don't know if you covered.
Yeah, that. I mean, you must have missed that, but I said that. Yeah,
okay.
That your suggestion was expected versus actual.
Okay. And then way back, I tried to say something more about the buyer reputation. I think it makes me think of eBay more than Amazon, but eBay days, even buyers wanted to get their feedback to be able to. Some sellers wouldn't transact with low feedback buyers. Buyers used to have reputation on eBay. Yeah. So we could have it where the seller just doesn't want to interact with low quality or new buyers. I think that was a setting eBay has or had. if I recall.
Well, and I also think that that's the transaction pattern dictated by the e-commerce protocol, is that the vendor has to accept an order, and so in that process, they would see what the buyer's reputation is, and so I think that would actually just be forced upon us.
Oh, really? We couldn't let the seller set a requirement if they wanted, like if they have a high value item or something.
No. I'm saying like it would. I'm saying we can't go the other way, where a buyer initiates a transaction and the seller is forced into it. I think the pattern is that the seller has to sign in order to produce the agreed upon address where the counterfactual smart contract will be deployed. And so like the vendor has to agree to a sale before an order is initiated.
In real time, right? Based under settings, so it could be a smart contract, is what you're saying, or in like the next day or 12 hours later they'd accept it, or.
Yeah, I mean, like I guess I don't know exactly how. I haven't really given any thought to like how we would enforce that like a vendor has to respond during a certain amount of time. It's something certainly to think about.
That might not be nice for the buyer, because the buyer, I think, especially with Amazon and others, are used to just buying it, and it's basically there's no way to not do it.
But that's what I'm saying is like I don't think we can actually, with the way that the counterfactual smart contract deployment works, I don't think we can initiate an order without. I mean, like we could on our like layer, and then we could like impact vendor reputation if they refuse to buy. But like the way that like the transaction works at the e-commerce protocol level, like because like the vendor has to sign a message which produces the address that the buyer ultimately sends the money to. Right? So like they have to produce a signature that attests. That's when on our call yesterday, Martin was talking about attestation. So they have to like attest to the fact that they will process that order. And so like the payment doesn't happen like immediately, like because again we're working with like it's like when you use like HODL and you do like peer-to-peer Bitcoin multi-sig transactions, like the buyer has to accept the contract and then you can deposit into the contract. But with counterfactual, like and so like the contract gets deployed even if the buyer doesn't accept. But with a counterfactual smart contract deployment, we wouldn't know the address of the eventual escrow contract until the buyer accepts. Until the vendor accepts the order.
I don't think that's right.
Do you not think so?
Anyone can calculate that address, and as long as there's like a standard way to calculate it, the buyer should be able to send the money to the address before the contract is actually created. I mean, I will check that out, but that's got to be the way that it works. We can't have someone buy something and then not be able to pay for it until later. That will just lose sales. I'm sure that's not the way it's supposed to work.
Okay, hopefully I'm wrong about it then. But in that case, then we go back to this problem of like vendors can't refuse a sale, and I guess that's fine. But yeah, then vendors just have to do sales whenever they get one. But I was under the impression
we should definitely come back to that and confirm that because that's a pretty big point. But
yeah,
like I said, I don't think that's the way that it's going to work. That it's meant to work, rather. Let's make a note to come back to it. And
I'm making a note now.
I mean, another way the seller could discourage a new buyer is have a higher price. I don't know if you think that's possible, but they could give a discount. Maybe it's not a higher price, but they give a discount to a established buyer, or rewards or incentives. I mean, I feel like there's got to be various different ways to incentivize good buyers and disincentivize newer bad buyers. Or is that, you don't think there's some logic we could put in there to do that?
No, can you make a note about that comment? I'm trying to write down this note.
Okay.
Transaction flow word. Because John, if it does, like so if it doesn't work like that, then a vendor has to accept an order. If it does work in the way that I think it does, which I could be, I'm very open to being wrong about this. But if it works in that way, where a vendor has to make an attestation and make a signature before they produce an address, like, then maybe we have to design our own sort of like intermediary escrow, where that is just like as soon as the buyer or the vendor produces their signature and contract, it automatically just sends to them. I know that adds like sort of a layer of complexity to it, but to avoid that problem of like losing sales because the transaction doesn't happen immediately, like that, I think that would maybe be the workaround. But again, I'm you may be correct, and it may not work that way, and it might just be that like as soon as a transaction is initiated, it's sent straight to the generated address, and no signature is required from the vendor in order to generate it.
So what if they do it in Ether, and then Ether drops 30% in 12 hours or 10% or 20%?
Do you mean like so in intermediary escrow solution? And then the buyer would just be like, no, I won't accept it. Or sorry, the vendor would just be like, no, I won't accept this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is a problem.
But in that case, Purse would have a buffer of a certain percentage of over the funded transaction value to account for cryptocurrency volatility. I think theirs was 8%. So if you're transacting in cryptocurrency and the currency fluctuates too much in value, you use the buffer, and if the buffer's not enough, then the transaction goes back into requiring funds state.
Yeah, I mean, it does beg this like sort of larger question about our denominator currency and whether or not USD is like always our denominator. Maybe, I mean, certainly that's a discussion for another time and something we need to maybe give a little bit more thought to. But because like volatility is a relationship, right? Like volatility is something that is expressed in a relationship to a currency denominator rather than something like if someone just wants Ether and they're like, I want this much Ether for this thing, then but the volatility relative to the dollar doesn't matter. It's similar in like NFT sales, right? Where an NFT collection will set a price, and that price is denominated in Ether, and they don't care about the volatility in USD. They just want whatever it is in Ether. And so I don't know if that's something that. Sorry, go ahead.
Could you somehow make that into like a vendor option? Like the vendor could set his own parameters. Like say, I want this. If it's a cryptocurrency we're using to price items in, I expect to be paid in that amount regardless of volatility. Something like that. I mean, you could make it into like part of the vendor configuration thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that would be like this little structure I'm creating here, currency denominator.
And I guess that would depend on particular items.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, like it would also change based on this. So yeah, and one of the other things we were talking about is like swaps at the point of sale in the like sort of protocol level transaction logic. Oh man, I feel like we guys, this is a complex project.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we could just stick to stablecoin. We still believe most will want stablecoin.
You're talking about like dynamic pricing, where the price of the item fluctuates with the cryptocurrency's relationship to the dollar, versus like a static amount. I think if people care about the relationship to the dollar, they will just ask for the price in stablecoin. I think that's the actual solution to that.
Yeah, I mean, well, but like, what if they set a price for an item in should it be possible for them to set a price for an item in dollars and then like or I mean, it should be possible for them to set a price for an item in dollars and then also accept ETH. And then,
that's a layer I think that's a layer on top, though. Like, they could implement that themselves, in which, like, they're periodically changing their product's price in the directory. But whether they implement that themselves or someone else implements that as, like, a layer on top, or we provide that as a service to them, it's still, like, regardless, like, an outer layer. Because it's not, I mean, the real, like, convenient solution to that would be just price your item in USDT or USDC or some other stable. It's possible to do.
Yeah,
I mean,
the
simplest would be for them to do it themselves. Just do it manually, and then the next level would be for them to automate that. And then another level would be for us or someone else to be like, hey, we have provided the service that will do that for you.
It's something to think about. I will say I think we're getting a little bit too much into the weeds on these hyper specific technical issues.
Yes,
I mean, right. Yeah. So if you don't mind, if we could just like take a little bit of a step back and talk about this general sort of mechanism here, this idea that the protocol DAO emits natural tokens and then also emits like what is functionally the governance token for marketplaces to marketplaces who then are able to distribute it. Can we just can I start a little bit of a discussion of like, so what do people think of this? Does this make sense? What are the holes in this idea if you can identify any of them? And I'm gonna go silent just for a second because I also need to go to the bathroom. But yeah, if you all wouldn't mind discussing that.
Oh, I have a really dumb question, but what is the difference between a token, a pure token like the one above from the protocol DAO to the judge registry, and a stake token?
So this stake token is like the governance token in the marketplace DAO. So when you think about it, it's like let's say at the protocol level there are like three genres of token. Right, there is let's call it load token, which is just the base ERC20 token. Doesn't have a lot of functionality, but can be given functionality by being staked into a contract. So, for instance, you can take this token and you can stake it in the protocol DAO smart contract, which produces the wrapped like protocol governance token. So that's the token that would have rights to vote on protocol parameters, emission schedules, weights to different metrics, changes in metrics, changes to acceptance of judges in the registry. There's a bunch of different like decisions that the protocol DAO should be able to make, and that's also another discussion that we need to think about and define what are those actions of the protocol DAO that can be voted on with this token. So the other action that you can take with the base token is you can stake them in the marketplace contract, which creates a new marketplace DAO and creates, and through that staking process, it creates like the stake governance token for that marketplace DAO, which again gives you the rights to vote on the parameters that exist at the marketplace DAO level. So again, like there's this base token. Base token can be staked into the protocol DAO to vote on protocol DAO issues. The base token can be staked into the marketplace contract to create a marketplace DAO, which is then governed by the staked tokens in that marketplace DAO contract. And then when the protocol emits like the base token to the marketplace DAO contract and deposits them in some sort of like DAO smart contract controller, which the DAO sets the parameters of to distribute to its various like market participants, right? So this protocol DAO token can be then sent to the judge pool, can be sent X, Y, and Z. This is another thing that I'm not quite sure on, but that could exist. And again, maybe this is getting a little bit like there's a lot of background information here. This will maybe make sense to John and Mike. I don't know if it'll make a ton of sense to everyone else, but like that probably exists as a Moloch DAO with a treasury. That treasury is collecting marketplace fees. And then if you wanted to exit the marketplace, you would functionally burn this token, receive some of the base token, and your share of the underlying treasury. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if that it answers your question, and I get that's like a pretty complex answer, but that's the answer.
Yes, it is pretty complex. But then in that case, why would the judge registry receive pure tokens, pure load tokens, and not staked?
Because theoretically, the pure load tokens have like a market value. And so so it's a way of just like sort of paying them, but also they don't exist in a marketplace. So it doesn't make sense to give them like these governance tokens. Maybe it makes sense to give them the protocol DAO governance tokens, but I think it's like they should be given the choice of like, because like in this construction, the base token has a value, and then all the stake tokens should have a value that is higher than the base token value. Maybe not by a lot, but sort of logically, because they're tied to a treasury. And maybe, I mean, honestly, maybe this base token, this is also a Moloch DAO, and this is just a treasury share. So a similar relationship can exist where you just emit this base token, and you can, if you really just want to exit the whole system, you just burn it and take your percentage of the underlying protocol treasury. And maybe that's a better way, because then it's not like we're not letting market dynamics dictate the payment that we're giving the judge registry. Instead, we're like allowing the treasury to sort of free float the value, so it can like dilute the value of an underlying treasury, which is denominated in a number of different currencies. But like someone can always just like take a payment and then burn it and take like whatever the underlying currency is, and that's what their payment would be for engaging in this like sort of Supreme Court justice system.
Jose, your question is, why does the judge registry not get a stake token reward? Why do they get just a straight unstaked token reward, whereas the marketplace gets a stake token reward? Is that right?
Yeah, sort of. I'm just trying to wrap my head around the staking versus pure token thing.
Did you get your head around it?
Somewhat, but let me ask another question to see if I'm understanding this correctly. Suppose somebody buys load token on a marketplace, on a cryptocurrency exchange. What prevents that person from engaging in judging and being part of the judge registry and taking decisions on the protocol DAO? Does that question make any sense at all?
Yeah, it does. So I think that there's two answers here. One is, and again, not all of this is fully formed. I sort of have an answer to your question, but I am not 100% certain that this should be the way it works. So again, we had a conversation with Martin. He was talking about like the process by which someone signs up to become a judge. And so I wrote a couple of thoughts about that over here somewhere. Yeah. So, like, the governors of the DAO should set a judge target, and then they set a minimum, like, sort of stake that a judge has to put up of the base token in order to enter the judge queue. And then potential judges apply to the judge queue based on where their position is relative to the target. So like if we set a target of 10 and they're the first person to apply, it would cost much less than if we set a target for 10 and they were the 100th person in line. That should cost more to prevent like spamming of the queue. And then the governors, this is a decision that I think the governors should be able to make at both levels, is they sort of review and approve judges to be added to the queue, and then they start like being assigned cases and render judgments, and they receive rewards based on that. So what prevents someone from buying the tokens on an exchange and then joining the judge queue? Nothing, right? Like other than supply dynamics, like how much of the supply is really actually hitting the open market. Some of that will determine whether or not they can join the judge registry. Also, what is the target for the number of judges? how many judges are already in the queue, so on and so forth. So that's what prevents that. What prevents someone staking in governance? Also nothing, right? So like some of this is like we're going to game out the supply dynamics and how much we anticipate or expect there to hit the open market at any given time. And again, if we tie the value a little bit to the underlying treasury, if for instance it's so I guess let me explain a little bit of like the way a Moloch DAO works. A Moloch DAO has two tokens. It has a governance token, which is sort of what I'm talking about. And like you can stake, or like I guess the base token would be the treasury token, and the treasury token is related to an underlying treasury in a proportional relationship. So if there's like $100 in an underlying treasury, and you have one of 100 tokens, you can go to the contract and burn that token and take $1 out. Because you are the redemption rate is proportional to the underlying treasury, and then as the treasury grows, your proportion stays the same, but the number value of that token also is correlated to or is proportional to the underlying treasury value. Now you can stake that token and create the governance version of the token as well, or we can issue that separately, right? That's something that we don't quite know how that works, but like. Let's just imagine that it's like staked, and then that gives you some sort of governance right. The staking process requires vesting for a period, but it also entitles you to some emissions of the base token as a result of your like governance responsibility. And then again, we can tie things like number of votes cast versus number of total votes as a metric for how much of those emissions you receive as a reward for good governance or for engagement in governance. We can also look at metrics like a number of votes that you're on the right side of. Anyway, it's neither here nor there. The point I'm making is that if we tie it to this like sort of underlying treasury value, then the market dynamics should push it into like the open market value should be the value of sort of like the underlying treasury instrument, or the proportional value of the underlying treasury instrument. And as the market value of it changes, people who hold it should be incentivized to either buy or sell. If it goes below sort of what the redemption rate is, then theoretically people would buy to then redeem it. And so you have this like sort of natural arbitrage that starts taking place to balance the market price versus the redemption price. So yeah, I mean, it gets into a pretty complex, I think, economic model, and that's part of like, I think why we're engaged in this process at all, is to like start understanding how all these dynamics impact the price of the underlying token and how it maintains any level of stability, and what like an emission schedule can even look like if we construct it this way.
Jose, is it helpful to think of the rewarding of just plain token as kind of like a payment, like someone getting paid a paycheck or some monetary reward, whereas issuing the stake token is kind of like, it implies more of a commitment, like a responsibility, or sort of like an ongoing relationship, kind of more like some sort of privileged stock that comes with voting rights or dividends or something like that. Is it helpful to think of it that way? Does that kind of clarify it?
It is. Yes, it is. So that's why Bo is saying that the stake token has a higher underlying value than the pure token, right?
Depending on what you want, yes. Like if you're okay with the token being locked in stake, and you like the rewards that it comes with, like the extra rewards, then yes, that is more valuable to you. Like by locking it, you're taking value away from it. So then you need to add something to it to make it worthwhile to people.
But yeah, it comes with like,
if you wanted like to bind that relationship between the judges and the protocol, then that could be a stake token. It depends on what we want to, like what relationships we want to maintain and define there.
Yeah, because like again, we're sort of defining emission schedules. As John said, yeah, we could emit to judges some amount of, or we could allow them to choose, right? Like, do you want the governance token, which is non-transferable and you can't sell, or do you? I mean, like, or do you want the base token because you need a salary? Also, the governance token doesn't have to be non-transferable. Again, all of these things are sort of up in the air right now. We're sort of arriving on a definition or a mechanism.
Well, in any case, I think that judges sitting on the protocol DAO level and not being involved with marketplaces, perhaps their vote or their token values would be less than those sitting in the marketplaces and transacting and everything. I mean, I understand that the whole point of tokens is that they're fungible, but votes and token values would seem to depend on your contribution to the marketplaces, right?
I didn't quite follow that, Jose. Yes.
Let me see how I word this better. It would seem, I mean, I asked about an ex-individual buying a token on the open market through an exchange, and then thus acquiring voting rights on the protocol. It would seem to me that his voting rights is not as valuable as someone being involved in the marketplace and, like, for example, say a vendor.
Yeah. Are you saying, when you say valuable, I think what you mean is like valuable to us. Like, we would prefer that people who have voting rights are also involved in this, they have a social stake in the network.
Yes,
that they're more involved
exactly.
They're not just like some rando dude off the street. That's more valuable to us.
Because
people.
Right, because then you would open up the DAO to speculation and that's like pump and dump schemes and all that stuff, and I don't think we want that.
Well, then we have to be like mindful of how available we make voting tokens. Like, would they be available to buy on? I mean, we can design that. We can make it so that there's only certain ways you can get voting tokens, and only certain parties have rights to them and stuff like that. So,
I think we should keep in mind that this is supposed to be sort of a guild of vendors, of sellers. So
exactly,
it is the sellers, the ones that sort of vote in the community. If we start giving votes to judges and all kinds of people that perform not the core activity, which is basically to list products and sell them, but the sort of adjacent, I think they're called, adjacent activities, I think we're overcomplicating the whole matter, and we should try to simplify as much as possible, because we also have to think how we're going to sell this idea, how we're going to attract sellers to actually come. If it's overly complicated, then it's just not going to be attractive enough, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's true. I think I agree with you. I think that, like, once we get the basic ideas, like the basic roles and the basic who does what in the system, and we will tweak things like that. We'll find through analysis, simulation, or gaming, whatever we decide to do, that it's not advantageous to make certain types of rights available to this party or that party or something like that.
But
and it'll be kind of like part of the tweaking.
I used to say that, Andres, too, but actually we're trying to make the Amazon process transparent, and that does mean those people that are behind the scenes inside Amazon would be compensated through this token and incentivized with this token, and the sellers are financing it and owning it, but they kind of need to support that kind of ecosystem of the arbitration.
Yeah, no, I can see the value of that. I just trying to bring to your attention, to everybody's attention, that we should try to simplify it as much as possible, meaning if it can be on the same token, perhaps it's easier, but if the solution is like a dual token, then okay. Yeah, it was just a comment.
No, that makes sense. But I think the idea is the sellers buy into this because it's trust, or it's a trust token. I think the reason people want to transact on this versus just directly buying from others on a marketplace is the transparency and the trust that it carries. It's like, so the sellers buy into this for the purpose the customers trust this resolution process and dispute resolution process.
Again, I think, like, when we're thinking about the construction of this it certainly seems complex, but like from a vendor's perspective, and like they'll be being rewarded in like I would also say I don't know that this is a dual token model, right? Like this is sort of what I'm saying is like it's one token, right? That token takes on different power as it is applied into different roles. So it's like there's one sort of base currency that's being emitted, and that base currency has a redemption rate. And like at any point, like if it's wrapped here, like if the marketplace is emitting to vendors, then the vendor should have the choice of like, okay, do you want to take this token and do you want to like apply it and lock it into like the governance process? Do you want power in making more decisions, or do you just want to burn it and take money, right? Whatever currencies are like held in the various treasuries, like when it's admitted to them, they should be given that choice. And so like, yeah, like if they continue to like lock it into the system, then they'll get more power to make decisions over time. But if all they care about is like making money in the short term, then they won't generate any sort of like protocol yield or power over time, but they will just be able to like make money and get some form of like hard currency emissions as they continue to engage the protocol in a good way. And yeah, I mean, I think it's a very complex balancing act of like making sure that we don't nuke the value of the token and making sure that all these incentives are aligned and that we're emitting at the correct rates and that these things logically make sense and fit into each other. But yeah, I think that's the difficulty of this like protocol of this tokenomic design. And to that point, I think that we could also be emitting at the protocol level to vendors. Like marketplaces could choose to incentivize vendors by emitting their own governance token to them. But we could also emit that idea of like, well, vendors exist at this protocol level and we want to incentivize them to join in general. Okay, well, we could do that through some parameter set by the DAO to choose to again, either give governance token or base currency to the vendors directly.
And when can we? We're going to have to make some of these decisions relatively soon, I believe.
Yeah.
So how long do we have before we have to sort of boil this to actual decisions?
Well, I mean, I think that how long do we have? I would say we have. I mean, we've come a long way and we understand how the mechanism roughly functions. And so now it's a question of like getting in and designing like some tests for economic models to test out. So like we have to do some work of like defining all the decisions that the protocol DAO should make. We have to do some work about defining all the decisions that marketplace DAOs can make. We need to figure out what parameters they can set. And then we can start like building a model of what this like token flow looks like and start sort of thinking about initial parameters, which tokens we want to emit where. In terms of timeline, it's tough because I feel like we have this soft deadline of March for getting our initial React site up. We have another sort of hard deadline of May for having it functioning together. And then I imagine that's when we start really deploying DAO contracts. So I would say by probably earlier, but like by mid to early April, we should have this really well defined to the point that we could actually build a model of it. And yeah, I think that's a timeline that makes sense.
I think we'll have to talk about the timeline because we have to coordinate a couple different things. Like we have to coordinate the protocol, which still has a lot of questions, with the token. So timeline, yeah, it's like what you said is good as just a kind of rough guideline for now, but I think we need to talk about it more to get into the details. And then we'll come up with like a more detailed picture as time goes on. I think that the process for designing the token is like this. Number one, what we're doing right now is just like very broad strokes, general idea of kind of what the protocol, what the tokenomics of the protocol would sort of look like. And we can do that just by discussion as we're doing. Second step would be to find some way to simulate it and game it out, like to see how this actually works, how all the pieces interact and what needs to be tweaked and settings, stuff like that. And that'll may require more discussion and like another iterative cycle of discussion, going back to tweak and gaming and etc., until we get very close to what we think is releasable.
And something to consider regarding the governance token that can be burned to get cash, that needs to be limited, because if for some reason a massive event of people wanting to burn their governance tokens happen at the same time, we might not be able to pay them.
No, that would never be true, because again, the token is proportional to an underlying treasury. So if 70% of people wanted to burn their token all at the same time, they would take 70% of an underlying treasury, even if that treasury was $1, right? It would distribute 70 cents to all the people who burned their tokens. So the underlying treasury is never under collateralized.
All right, gotcha.
John, how would a simulation occur in this process? Would it be like setting up a test marketplace as we have done, or is it some kind of mathematical simulation, or what?
I think there's different ways to do it, and we've talked about some of these ways. So there's software where we can kind of define rules without actually like designing without using necessarily the actual contracts of the tokens and stuff like that. We can define rules and then just run the simulation to see how everything interacts. Another way I've thought of, I haven't suggested it because I haven't really thought it through, is kind of making a game, like an interactive game where human parties can act as the simulation agents, where we can actually just make it a game and try to gain some advantage from it. But again, I might need to think that through a little bit. I'm not sure if anyone has done that either.
I love that idea.
I kind of like the idea. Yeah, I'm glad you like it. We'll have to think about it, though, to see if it actually would be useful and worth the trouble. But that's an idea. There's also... Sorry?
No, I was going to say, because my initial idea was, to build out, like, different representations of the smart contracts and the actors in Python. And then, it's just like a question of tweaking sort of like the system parameters and saying like, well, what is our initial token distribution and how many actors does that go to, and like allow them a certain number of like random actions or even like determined actions, or I mean, we could even I don't know, like building out a like an AI agent simulation might be prohibitively expensive and prohibitively time consuming.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then like if we build out a representation in Python of just these different objects, like I wonder how hard it would be port over to like some web-based game, because that could be a cool way to like not only test it out but also like engage a community and maybe even it's like monetizable in and of itself, right?
Yeah, it would be awesome. We should also not discount like the amount of effort and time it would take to even just build that, though.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think that could be maybe like the game, like the human-powered game could be precursor to a simulation. And a simulation doesn't necessarily need to be driven by AI. There's software. And also we've talked to that group, Senate, who we can pay them for their software, basically, their simulation software, which is specifically built to simulate tokenomics. Finally, we can actually pay Senate to, I believe, just do it for us, like be consultants and help us run the software. So there's like 4 different levels, possible different levels. And I guess any others are open suggestion.
Yeah, because I think it will probably be necessary for us to hire 2 sets of consultants. One will be, 3 sets of consultants, really. One is like sort of a tokenomic consultant at some point, like a actual tokenomic consultant. And second is a governance consultant. So like DAO House or Raid Guild would be examples of people who would help us, and like Martin, I think, can help us a little bit there as well. But like in doing some of these like actual implementations of these DAO mechanisms and the parameterizing voting and building out some of those smart contracts, people with like some experience building some more complex systems like this. And then third is like all of this is going to have to be wrapped with a smart contract code audit, just for like sanity purposes. And so like those I anticipate all three of those sets of consultants being fairly necessary at some point. Like I think we're a 3-person dev team right now, and I think we can do a lot, but like I do think that we'll need some help. And maybe it's not like so far as like paying consulting firms, and maybe it looks a lot more like engaging a community of people who represent those different constituencies and having them contribute and doing maybe some more coordinate-y sort of stuff to determine initial team distributions and getting buy-in from like industry participants that help us along this path. But yeah, I think those are 3 areas that I think we will really need to reach out for help for.
Well, regarding the simulation, you could have like different classes of individuals or actors, and then you would create the actors randomly. Like say you have a 20% of the users who are prone to make disputes and refunds, for example, and the vendors, you have 10% who are always making late transactions and all that stuff, and then you could just create a bunch of mathematical entities representing those users and running that as a simulation, but it would be a random agent-based simulation. There's a neat package in Python. It's called SymPy for handling asynchronous simulations like that. I think you guys should check it out.
Yeah, that's right. That's true.
And then just after you run a simulation, you get your data, and then you analyze, see what happens in this scenario.
Basically, yes. Yeah, and even the process of analysis is pretty complicated. So none of these things are simple.
No.
Yeah. But this is. I mean, if we skip those steps, then we'll be kind of gambling. So not simple, but definitely doable.
No, I do think that there is like, I think that we can get to a place in the near term, like somewhere around March, where we have our understanding of tokenomics, our tokenomics is sufficient enough that we can start presenting to investors. Because I think that is like understanding like the exact parameters that we need to be tuning and building out the simulation and everything like that. Like, I don't know that we need to do all of that in order to be able to present to like an investor like a broad strokes vision of how this ought to work. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know. That's a discussion that we maybe need to take up another time. Is like, when do we begin that process? What is our strategy there? I think a little bit will be informed by the work that I do in London and maybe some connections that I can make there, as well as like I know everybody else is like traveling to other conferences and places. And I don't know if we've really started coordinating like a investor relations team with an idea of like approaching a raise. But that is something that I think maybe we should start thinking about.
For sure. Well, I think there's also where we have this news with the other protocol, as you mentioned. I guess I don't know how much to reveal on the session, but it seems like we're getting closer to. I mean, I think that's involved in this setting, right? Like how we integrate with them as well, and what their plan is. That's kind of at least been an excuse, I'll say, for myself to delay the deeper thinking. But this session has been very helpful as well.
Yeah, I think, at some point when things come together, like more clearly, we're going to have to consider how our tokenomics interacts with their tokenomics.
Yeah.
And that will just become part of the overall simulation.
Yeah, especially given that like our DAO might control the voting token of the protocol DAO, like, or the e-commerce protocol DAO. So yeah, because like when we think about like burn, right, which treasury is holding those tokens, and is it like that? That's an interesting question of like, if someone is able to burn an underlying treasury, does that underlying treasury have a percentage of the super protocol tokens, or is that separate? Because that also could be income, right? And so is that also counted when we're thinking about the underlying treasury value?
Okay. I mean, I feel like an hour and a half is enough. We don't have to always fill 2 hours. But this has been great. Thanks, Bo. Really appreciate this. It's very helpful.
It's pretty dense, Bo. Thank you. Hats off, man, because it's a tough job for sure to figure out all these things. Appreciate the effort for sure.
Look, man, I will say, this is my path. I really dig this, and this is the thing I enjoy thinking about the most. There's a lot of other things that I have to work on and do, but this is I think that this is the role I have been most excited to fulfill. And so look, thank you for giving me the opportunity.
This is good because it's also a learning experience. There's so much to learn in this subject.
Indeed. Yes.
It's such a complex group of skills and knowledge that we're all learning from it, and that's cool.
Great.
Okay. Yeah.
So next week we have another town hall. We'll put in. It'll be actually a little bit different style, I guess. It'll be more some updates about the team and what's happening. But when should we do the next one of these? And probably, I don't know. I think we should have James here live when these happen, if we can. But I guess we can keep people updated about the next one for this. Or Bo, do you have a suggestion?
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's just it takes a lot of time and effort to move forward. And there's, a lot of thinking that has to go in. Again, I would implore anyone who wants to jump in and give their notes and suggestions. Appreciate, Jose, the contributions you've made to the board, but notes and suggestions specifically around, again, parameters, decisions that the DAO should be able to make, clarifying questions around what these mechanisms look like, and then all the way down onto what are the individual actions that we are incentivizing and disincentivizing for particular actors within the ecosystem. I think we finally settled on mostly with this question of buyer being the last sort of lagging issue of where does this exist as an actor in the ecosystem. I think we've finally sort of gotten an idea of where all these actors exist and what level they exist at and where emissions can take place. And so really diving into what formulas can we start to build out as to how to determine percentages of payouts to individual actors within each of these different levels of the ecosystem. Any sort of notes, comments, help would be much appreciated. But in terms of time, next Thursday would be fine. Friday is when I leave for Bangkok. So this time next Thursday would... Oh, no, because we're doing our town hall next Thursday.
Next Wednesday night, 8 p.m. Wednesday, 8 p.m. Thailand.
Oh, okay.
So we could do Thursday.
Okay, so then, Yeah, Thursday at 4 would be fine for me. I'll be able to put a little bit more work into it next week. But yeah, I mean, I do think that a lot of the meeting is a function of how much time I can dedicate to moving forward in communicating a conception of how the mechanisms work. So again, any help on that would be greatly appreciated.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Cool.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Paul.